Another exciting session of the BPM Conference 2020, and welcome to Sevilla or wherever you are. Together with my colleague Owen, I will be the co-chair of this track, and this track will be dedicated to two fascinating topics: robotic process automation and BPM maturity. So I hope that the next 75 minutes of your life will be enjoyable, educational, and inspirational. By now, we also hope that you're very much used to the format of the conference. That means each of the four presenters will have 12 minutes, followed by 5 minutes Q&A. And of course, you've got the chance to submit your questions using the Q&A forum. Having said this, before I introduce the first speaker, we want to introduce another piece of Sevilla. So please, if you don't mind, Adela, showing us the video.
Yes, sure.
We are now in the historic city center of Sevilla, and it's huge. There are so many small streets filled with restaurants, bars, and all kinds of shops. It's actually not a surprise that the center is so big, because Sevilla in the 16th century was one of the largest cities in Europe. You can see the remains of that history still here. When you walk around here, you see people walking around, enjoying life. It really looks like that is the thing that Sevillans like most, walking around here.
But we also work.
They also work. And we're now in front of a traditional tapas bar.
So this tapas bar is called Blanco Cerrillo, and it was founded in 1926, so it's almost 20 years actually. I know stories about my parents coming here when they were a couple. And yeah, so this is famous for its fried fish. It's called adobo. It's prepared in a special way where you have to put the fish inside a sauce, which is made with vinegar, garlic, and some spices. And you have to keep it there for a while, and then you can fry it. And yeah, many people, when they are shopping or walking around the center, this is a compulsory stop to come here to have some adobo.
I'm getting hungry.
Let's go for it, Papa. Okay, and I would also like to remind you that there is a quiz open in the topic Sevilla quiz in the Huba app. So go there and ask them the questions. Thank you.
We have to thank you, Adela, for what you and the entire team have done. You do a tremendous job here under difficult circumstances, and we're truly jealous and probably slightly hungry as well. Let's kick it off. So let's move from Sevilla to the beautiful place of Ghent in Belgium. And it's an absolute delight to welcome one of the global thought leaders on the topic of this track, BPM maturity. Amy, you've worked in that space for a long time. I think you benefit from having a practical background, working in government. You're now a social professor in Ghent. You coordinate the cluster on business process orientation. And your credentials and credibility in this space have been recognized. And only 2 years ago at the BPM conference, you won the best paper for the paper in the management track, which all shows your tremendous credibility. We're delighted to have you here. And the next 12 minutes, the stage is all yours. So if you don't mind, please sharing your screen. And from all of us, very warm welcome to the conference.
All right, thank you for this nice introduction. Hi, everyone. I will talk about intelligent robots in business processes, and we particularly asked office workers, managers, and consultants about their perceptions across 3 dilemmas. Let me see. Okay. So I will first start with a small research context, because we are now entering the 4th industrial revolution, or Industry 4.0, which is highly influenced by artificial intelligence and robotics. When taking a people perspective, Industry 4.0 implies drastic changes in the job markets. But this is not a new phenomenon. Also in previous revolutions, human tasks have been replaced, also were supported by machines, with employees who need to adapt their skills and entrepreneurs who need to create new jobs. For instance, maybe you still remember the novel of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This novel describes a visionary leader who replaced all employees by robots, but Charlie's father was rehired for a new job that was created for machine maintenance. Indeed, robots are still exist today, and they evolve very fast, and they have become able more and more to perform also social and cognitive tasks. Until now, most studies either deal with the technical aspects of robots, or they deal with manual workers or lower skilled employees, such as in manufacturing. Also, the BPM domain talks about robots, but more from the perspective of robotic process automation for routine-based work. And therefore, we have decided to focus on the people aspects that are related to other employee types. And namely, we focused on office workers, managers, and consultants. So we based our research on dilemmas, so hypothetical situations in the future. And that means that we have defined the notion of an intelligent robot very broadly, namely as a robot that is able to perform any task in the future, so that people should not care about the technical feasibility or what is actually realistic and what is not. It was just about their perceptions and their concerns. Because more research is indeed needed about the psychological reactions of higher skilled employees. Their complementary human-robot cooperation that triggers a new balance between technology and also society. For the purpose to better understand the implementation of such process innovations, we have the research question as shown on the slide, namely, which factors explain why employees would leave their jobs, their work practices to intelligent robots, fully or in partly. Our intention is to focus on employee attitudes for using intelligent robots in their daily work. So we focus on their points of view, their concerns, their needs, and not necessarily on the technical feasibilities. What was our research method? So we have applied a qualitative research method based on semi-structured interviews, and we have based ourselves on dilemma in analysis. So we have a total of 48 interviews with office workers, managers, and consultants that we had in our network. So it was a network of our internships of students in specializing in IT management, and we were able to have long interviews with those internships. And we have asked them 3 dilemmas. A dilemma about semi-automation, a dilemma about no automation, and a dilemma about full automation, in order to know whether they are willing to give up some tasks in full or in part. This is just a general question, because in the interviews, of course, there were different questions for each of the dilemmas separately, but this is just a summary question of how the respondents were asked about the dilemmas as such. Then what were the main findings until now? Well, first of all, it is important to know the task or the processes that are mostly mentioned to compare across the 3 dilemmas. And in the full automation column that you see on the right, you can read that some work is usually perceived as more simple or just boring, and people are just very willing to give up on those tasks. You see administration jobs, filling out timesheets, or testing. This type of work is in strong contrast to the people-related tasks that were mentioned in the no automation dilemma that you see in the middle of the table. Such duties link more to managing relationships with customers and employees. Think about coaching employees, providing them with HR appraisals and feedback, determining your business strategy. And then we have the semi-automation on the left. Most mentioned jobs were linked to complex reporting, complex data decision-making, contract management, and so on, for which technical support could prepare the input that is needed for making a human-based decision afterwards. On the slide, you also notice 2 overlaps, but still with a different reasoning in mind, because each of those dilemmas were characterized by different task types. So they have dedicated characteristics. In a no automation dilemma, work was more seen as being social, creative, dealing with sensitive issues such as employee feedback or dismissals. For instance, humans were asked for motivating people, for convincing people, for creative thinking, and therefore they put this aspect in the no automation dilemma. The interviewees also mentioned situations in which contextual decisions were more subjective rather than applying predefined rules. The fully automated work was described as very time-consuming and not adding real value to the core business, such as administrative duties that do not really motivate people to carry them out. And in the semi-automated dilemma was mainly characterized by decision-making based on a very large amount of specialized data. Then some of the main arguments that were mentioned by the respondents are illustrated in the next table. You see that all employees actually saw benefit in robotics to some extent. The main argument against robots in the no automation dilemma was linked to the importance of human contact for handling sensitive issues or for convincing people. So the employees would rather not give up on such tasks. In the semi-automation dilemma, technical support was perceived as welcome for facilitating the human jobs. And then the reasoning in the full automation dilemma was mainly to free up time for more human specialization, focusing on the core business. And then remarkably, almost all of our interviewees were very positive about the potentials in the future for intelligent robots. Only 5 out of 48 employees gave a neutral score, and 2 interviewees gave a score of 2 out of 5 on a Likert scale. Based on their responses, however, also those 7 employees, so those 2 plus 5 employees, were also positive about robotics, and they did see a lot of benefits, but they wanted to show some concerns or express some social issues in their mark as well. And also vice versa, also those employees with a positive satisfaction mark, they also raised similar critical concerns about social sustainability. We then grouped all those concerns across 9 types of facilitation needs. So we grouped them, we classified them based on some related similar content. And these are aspects that require extra attention by managers and organizations when they want to implement robotics themselves. In particular, the facilitation needs provide more details about what office workers, managers, and consultants actually expect from their organization. First of all, regarding extra training. Different types of training have been mentioned, so a whole curriculum has been expected. 2, the efforts to obtain a new culture to be open to change and to have trust in the management. Also top management support, extra budgets, not only for investing in robots, but also for trial and error and investing in the right experiments. Then also in initiatives to reach higher employee involvement, and different initiatives have been proposed to help that. Also extra IT support, extra support for drastically reconsidering the business rules as such. A lot of ethical concerns have been raised for which they want real guarantees actually that there will no dismissals from the staff members, and extra time that they could spend on experimenting with the possibilities of robotics. Then afterwards, those 9 facilitation needs have been subdivided among the 3 stages, or the 3 main stages of a typical process innovation project, namely before, during, and after the implementation of a robot, to have some kind of a summary or a robot that organizations can have as a checklist for a gradual adoption of intelligent robots. So this means that the main ideas derived from the previous slide have been restructured among a project time frame of a digital process innovation. It's merely meant as a checklist for organizations. And from a theoretical point of view, all those refinements into the 7 facilitation needs can be seen, or the 9 facilitation needs can be seen as a refinement to existing theories about IT acceptance, like the UTAUT model does explain about some typical variables, but they do not make the refinement into all the details that we have found about intelligent robots in this case. So in sum, we could conclude that all interviews were very positive and even highly positive about the use of intelligent robots for their daily work. They did see a lot of benefit, but much more attention is needed to social sustainability in order not to create a new gap between rich and poor in society. So for people who cannot keep pace with the needs for working with those robots and so on. Also, training needs have been mentioned. New training curricula will be needed, not only in organizations, but also in schools, as from primary school onwards. And also governments worldwide need to coordinate how those new skills and new job types will enter. New job types are, for instance, more focused on maintenance and controlling, and educational programs need to focus more on creativity, exception handling, conceptual thinking, and also logical reasoning. These are things that also kids from primary school and secondary school certainly need to learn very fast. So in the future, employees will need to interpret data rather than do the operational data input themselves. And finally, our study also showed that different transitions are needed for different employee types. For instance, prior studies already focus on manual workers in the manufacturing, for instance, but in our sample, one can also differentiate more between office workers, managers, and consultants, so the higher skilled employees, let's say. So what is next? In follow-up work, we will need to investigate our data collection to also find such contingencies and to differentiate more between individual and organizational variables that we collected so far. So now we have analyzed them in a more generic way, and in coming up research, we will do more of contingency work. We also plan to do surveys to better generalize our findings, because so far we have a sample of 48 interviews only. So thank you for your attention. I'm very open for your questions and tips and tricks. I will be present in the coffee break this afternoon, because tomorrow morning I will not be available because I have to chair another session, but you can have a chat also with me this afternoon during the coffee break. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amy. Much appreciated. And a big round of applause from everyone. Amy, you stayed on time, so we've got a few minutes for Q&A, and I'd like to invite our audience again to submit their questions over the Q&A button on Zoom, please. Amy, well done on the presentation. Maybe first quick question from my side. I like how you add a process flavor to the future of work and automation, and you refer to different employee types. Do you imagine we will see different process persona, like we have got customer persona in the world of design thinking?
You mean what I want to do for, I'm sorry, I did not really understand the question.
In design thinking, we talk about different persona. We put customers in different groups and create different processes for different customer groups. Do you envisage a world where we have got employee persona and craft different types of processes for different types of employees?
Well, I think that the needs will be different, for instance, for consultants than, for instance, managers in a regular organization, and that there are also different facilitation needs that need to be taken into account for the organizations. And that is what I meant with the contingency approach that we want to develop. And then afterwards, we can try to have more specialized or practical advice that is more tailored, let's say, because now currently it's not yet tailored as such. And what I wanted to do with a step-by-step gradual, with the table, let's say, that I have mentioned before, is rather as a summary of the tips and tricks so far, but they can be tailored also in some kind of, let's say, a maturity model approach, so that organizations can be guided in different steps towards such a successful implementation, to have more stepwise best practices as such. So there is indeed some future work that is possible so far, but the tailoring notions, or the rather more refined categorizations, will still need to be done. But I assume that, for instance, for consultancy companies, it's quite different than a traditional company or other different.
Thank you, Amy. Much appreciated. Again, I'd like to ask the audience for any sort of questions, and as long as I see silence, I'm also happy to invite my fellow panelists here for any questions from anyone.
Yeah, Amy, hello, this is Owen. I see you've got 147 people listening in, so it's been a very, very insightful discussion, and you've been thanked for the great insights. But I'd like to ask you a question. You know, RPA, there can be a very, very large proliferation of RPA, and it's certainly, I think we're starting to see it in some of the banks and some of these big institutions. Do you foresee any risk of losing control of these RPAs? You know, a company literally has thousands of them out there, and over time, you know, people forget as to what the actual purpose was, and they just chug away. Have you got any comment on that?
Yes. So,
be mindful, you've got a minute for your answer, so try to be short and sharp.
Okay, so well, one of the guarantees that was mentioned by many of the interviewees was guarantees that they could control the robots, that there was a good overview of what robots are allowed to do, so that there will be good policies about what the jobs of the robots could be, how far the robots could go, how the interviewees or the employees could correct the robots if they make mistakes. What about accountability? Who is responsible when robots make mistakes? Who can make the final decisions and so on? So there was a huge discussion about policies that are needed to have indeed such an overview of what the robots can do and how far they can go, and also good IT support, some more an architectural perspective of how many robots can deal with how many processes and so on. So a good overview was one of the concerns, also big concerns from our interviews, and they wanted some guarantees by the managers that indeed such ethical concerns that the employees could really control their job also, that it was not merely the robots who take over the jobs.
Thank you so much. Sorry, on. Yeah. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm a great fan of your work, and I love how you bring people, processes, and organizational context together on very contemporary topics. So well done, and congratulations again on your single author paper being accepted here. Well done. I might quickly, and again, big applause from all of us here. Christian, I will quickly introduce you, and then Owen will introduce the topic. Christian has an interesting career, and he started in the beautiful city of Münster, where he did a bachelor, master's, and PhD. And then he came to the equally beautiful city of Brisbane, where he worked for the SAP Research Center. So the move from Münster to Brisbane is a popular move for some. He went to the KIT, the Cultural Institute of Technology, and now he finally arrived in Würzburg, where he's an assistant professor. And a large team that is behind this topic, which I think actually continues what Amy talked about. So I hand over to my co-chair, Owen, for the introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And, greetings from Brisbane, Christian. Christian will be presenting a paper on a consolidated framework for implementing robotic process automation. It is, as we've just discussed now, a disruptive technology. With still a high rate of failure. So coming up with a framework will be of most interest. So really look forward to the presentation. Over to you, Christian.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. So as you can see, this is an effort by quite a number of people, partly due to people coming and leaving teams. So half of those people are from my team, half of the people are from Axel's team, and Axel and I drew straws. He's in a faculty meeting, I'm at BPM. So I will be presenting on behalf of my authors, and let me get right to the motivation of the whole thing. And you, Owen, partly motivated that already. So there is an obvious need to optimize processes because companies compete in international markets and fast-moving markets, and so far so well known. This is hardly anything new that I'm telling you here. The key issue that we observe is that there's still many processes that are digital but manual. So you still have people to do the clicking, and these are processes that do not manage or are hard to manage at scale if you compare that to fully automated processes where you have access to cloud resources and so on and so forth. And some of our research that you may be aware of deals with what we call the long tail of processes. And one observation that we make is that these processes that are still manual and that are not being considered for optimization, they're typically not in the short head of this distribution, so then hardly show up in reorganization or optimization efforts, but they're in the long tail. And the long tail is not an 80-20 problem, but if you look at Anderson's book and at what we find out as well when talking to practitioners, is that the long tail rather constitutes 50% of optimization potential or of value of processes, because it's just so many back-end processes, for example. And you cannot organize and optimize them in a similar fashion. So you need something more lightweight because you don't have the skills, and project complexity rises with the amount of processes you touch. And RPA seems to be the suitable approach for lightweight automation these days. Nevertheless, there are reports, and you already mentioned them, that there are many projects that are considered to be failed. So we took this number from an Ernst & Young report. There will be others, and not only success stories, especially if you look behind the or under the hood and behind the curtains to find out how those projects worked. And in part, we consider this to be due to insufficient guidelines and governance. And that's basically where we start from, to say, okay, there's a need for this implementation framework. And there are also a couple of challenges that are well known. These are challenges from the paper of Sierpes from Computers in Industry, Robotic Process Automation, Contemporary Themes and Challenges. And we look in particular at the challenge number 7, 8, 10, this methodological support for adoption implementation here. We look at socio-technical factors and obviously the systematic design, development, and evolution. So what have we done? We followed a design-oriented research method, and I talked to you about the problems and objectives and why we did that. Then we did 2 key iterations, structured literature review. We looked at many different publications. The final set was 23. To find out what kind of stages are being reported when academia writes about RPA projects. And then we took a second round of expert interviews using the platform Zing, and we talked to them about how they perceive those stages that we found, and if there's something missing, if they wanted to add something, if it was complete rubbish. And we interviewed 8 people here, and then we used the replies and the findings from the literature review to consolidate a framework, and evaluated that with those experts again to get any feedback. So to give you some insights and numbers, so we used the terms robotic process automation and the term RPA to look into title abstract keywords were available in these databases that you see here. We found 72 papers, and looking at the content of the papers, we reduced this number, and then we did a text analysis. We did forward-backward search, and we came out with a final set of 23 here that we looked at in detail. And not all of those are reports that are published in peer-reviewed outlets, so some of them were working papers, so we took extra care when looking at those. Next was the interviews. Here you can see an overview of the people we asked, and what you can see is that it's mostly consultants internally to a company, but also a vendor and an external consultant. So interviews were about 580 minutes, 150 pages of descriptions. Most of that is available on B2Share as research data. Link is in the paper if you want to have a look at it. It's in German, unfortunately. And this is what came out of the first phase of our first iteration. You can see the stages that we found, and you can see the 23 cases, which are in the columns. And you can see that most of the cases used 3 to 5 stages in their framework, which may also be due to the limited length you have in publications. But since some of that were working papers, it's not necessarily an issue. When asking the interviewees, we found that they said, well, something that's definitely missing is asking questions about the usefulness, benefits, and the added value of introducing RPA at a very early stage. So it's not a technological issue, it's also a business strategy issue, and they suggested to add something somewhere up here, saying you need to align RPA with the business strategy. Further, they said long-term service and transfer is something that can go into the scaling of RPA services because it's all related, and it shouldn't be different stages. It can go all together. So this leads us to a framework that looks like this in our final consolidation, and it has kind of 3 parts. So there's this main part of 9 stages for conducting an RPA project. There's the second part of a continuous cycle where you need to establish support for RPA that is spanning across projects. And we clustered that in 3 general phases, which are not very, very, very distinct, but which have a kind of a moving border when you move from one to the other stage, as you can see here with the initialization and implementation. So for the remainder of the talk, let's have a quick look at these stages. What do we propose in here? So first up is the identification of automation needs, where it is clear that RPA shouldn't be a technology-driven topic. It is an enabler, obviously, but you will need, similarly to BPM, you need qualitative and quantitative analysis to figure out which robots actually make sense in order to approach this in a structured fashion. And this needs to be synchronized with business strategy, with management, in order to get support also for the maintenance and the longevity of these robots. And then RPA is not the only technology that you should obviously consider. Sometimes there's something better to do the job. So as we said, it's not necessarily technology driven, but technology enabled. You should also look at other automation options. Maybe even a BPM project is a better way in a traditional sense, rather than using something lightweight. The actual work is something where we said maybe you need to involve external consultants for scalability, for skill transfer, and so on. It starts with process selection. So what kind of processes do you select? Amy talked about asking employees. Sometimes it's about looking at process traces, finding out where there's bottlenecks and see if they are human induced or not. So there's other work from us that I've cited here shamelessly. So there are first approaches to find out how to quantitatively look at processes for RPA prioritization. Then it's software selection, which needs to consider a number of factors, not only if it can get the job done, but if it's something that you have skills for, because these softwares, they work differently in certain aspects. There should be a proof of concept that should run for a number of weeks a month to evaluate the feasibility. Obviously, this should also be done in terms of a business case with evaluation criteria. This is work in progress. So some people obviously look at the processing time, but it's also about the error rate, IT costs, and so on. You need to roll it out, which is probably not RPA specific, but it needs to be done nonetheless. What is more important is that you consider adaptation and scaling, because one robot will hardly do the job. You will need multiple of those. And employee satisfaction is quite an important point here as well, because the robot will have human co-workers. So this needs to be established in a not so invasive way, I'd say. Center of Excellence is probably something for larger enterprises with multiple clusters of robots. With small, medium enterprises, it's probably not necessary in the same size, but nevertheless, it's important not to lose track of the robots, and you will need to establish these support functions. I'll not go into details here because I'm running out of time, so let me just conclude. This framework gives you a first glimpse at how you can approach RPA projects in a structured way. We applied that at a small case study with the Sierpes AG. Paper is forthcoming, and we didn't have to adapt the framework in any particular way. We just found out for a small, medium-sized enterprise, not everything is that necessary. So you may need to reduce the amount of stages or the amount of tasks to a sensible matter if your company is a smaller one. Something that we didn't consider too much yet is the interdependence between RPA and BPM, because those should go hand in hand. Our key finding is more or less that it's very important to understand for companies what RPA does and what RPA does not do. And I think this framework gives you a little bit of a structured support to answer and ask these questions. So yeah, on behalf of my co-authors as well, thank you very much for listening in, and I'm happy to take questions now.
That was most insightful. We are pushed a little bit for time. I think there's time for one very quick question, and that is, when do you think is the best time to implement the Center of Excellence for RPA? Is it a good idea to invest money and effort and time to implement a COE during the implementation phase?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because we haven't applied the framework in a large company yet, but in a small company where COE will be very small and efficient initiative. You should do it, that's my perception, before or during the early phases of your scaling phase. But because once you start spreading robots, you need to be able to manage those and to keep track of them, because they have the tendency to fail if their UI changes, and that can be happening at just any point in time if you get an update or if you have an external website you scrape. So that's the latest point, I'd say. It's probably not necessary during the implementation of any first robot, but when you start to scale, you need to think about how to manage those robots.
Well, Christian, thank you so much. As I say, we're a bit tight on time, but anyone who's got questions, I'm sure they can catch up with you in the coffee session. Thank you so much.
I wonder if we have time for maybe one or two more questions from the audience. So maybe Christian, if you don't mind, two very quick ones and maybe quick questions. So Mahendra, good to have you here from Surabaya, Indonesia, asks, what is so specific about RPA as opposed to IT or automation projects?
So it's nothing that is completely different from other automation projects. The type of integration is very different, and the mimicking of the software, because it mimics humans. So it is important to understand that you automate something that's already there, and if that's not working, then you're just doing it faster by automating it. So that's one point that needs to come up during the early stages of business analysis. And that's, I think, the key differentiator, that you don't necessarily do anything new if you just implement it, but
Sure.
yeah, you just take the human and use a robot to do the exactly same thing.
Much related to your framework, so where these differences stand out and make your framework unique. And maybe quick last question and quick answer, please. Christian Sareki wants to know, what's the relationship between RPA bots and RPA projects? For example, in the interviews, get you any insights, how many RPA bots are typically related to an RPA project?
No, we didn't ask that, but it's an interesting question. So from our, I don't know, perception, probably we talk about one bot is one project, so one bot doing one job, and it can be multiplied doing the same job if you need that scalability. But I would say yes to Christian, that one project can have multiple bots if it's a more complex process that you're tackling. But that's a question of how you segment the works being done. But no, we don't have any answers through the interviews.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Christian. Michael, I'm glad you saw those questions. I've just been looking at Wova, which isn't the right place. And over to you, Michael, for the next intro. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And this is why we have two here as co-chairs. So, Christian, can I ask you again, please stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Christian, you spoke about companies that have up to 300,000 employees. The next topic will take us to the opposite side, to small and medium-sized enterprises. And this whole track captures RPA and maturity. So the next two presentations are closer to maturity. We also move from Würzburg now to Cairo. So the next two authors are Mahi Samia Ismail and Ralf Kliszewski from the German University in Cairo. And the topic of their presentation is the alignment of business processes in IT with a focus, as indicated, on small and medium-sized organizations. And you're using a game-based learning approach to understand and to increase stakeholders' maturity. We very much look forward to the next 12 minutes of our lives and to the Insight presentation. Thank you so much. And I think, from what I understand, Mahi, you will conduct the presentation.
Yes. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Mahi, a researcher and an assistant lecturer in the German University in Cairo. I was actually hoping we get to meet physically at the conference, but we'll try and make the best out of the presentation. I'm here to present my master's thesis, of course, supervised by Professor Ralph Kliszewski, with the title BP-IT Alignment in SMEs, a game-based learning approach to increase stakeholders' maturity. Well, the motivation, something's wrong with, the motivation behind the topic was actually the major issue of aligning IT with business. And as you can see, it's ranked third in the organization's top 10 most important IT management issues in 2018. And this was found particularly relevant for small, medium enterprises, as they lack the capability of properly integrating processes, people, and technology. Given that they also dominate the economic structure and they're perceived actually as an enabler to sustainable growth and dynamic employment force, especially in developing countries. Keeping that in mind, all the guiding approaches that were found to BP-IT alignment had no clear distinctiveness for SMEs. And it was seen that SMEs, they do make limited use of the BPM concept because the entrepreneurs and the management in charge, they lack the confidence in attaining the BPM benefits, and so they adhere to obsolete principles. And when we talk about SMEs' lack of maturity, we relate here more to the individual capabilities of understanding the challenges in accomplishing the BP-IT alignment. There were two major requirements actually that were seen as the main prerequisites for SMEs that were affordance to scale and scalability. And this is why we aim to develop an artifact or a solution that is suitable to promote this alignment between BP-IT and IT and increase the maturity in SMEs stakeholders as a stakeholder. Okay, we opted for game-based learning for developing these BPM competencies in SMEs. And as defined by Gartner, this would be the use of game mechanics and experience design to digitally engage and motivate people to achieve their goals. And it was also seen that the application of game-based learning in the enterprise, it proved to be an effective catalyst to many business processes. And this is why it was actually considered as a specific solution to address the lack of maturity in SMEs. So the research journey started with constructing this research model, and as you can see, the aligner in the middle is the output or the artifact of this research, and it's used by the two stakeholders, SME managers and SME consultants. The consultant typically advises the SME manager, who then applies the competencies into how to align their IT with business processes. And this alignment was classified or categorized into three different phases: the expectations phase, the activities done during this alignment, and the output evaluation post IT implementation. And so the research question was, how can a game-based learning approach support SMEs in their alignment of IT with the business processes? Okay, the research method used to address this question was design science and the famous 6 phases by Pfeffers et al. And the first phase, identifying the problem and the motivation, was basically done through the theoretical problem identification through extensive literature reviews. And this problem was then confirmed in practice by interviewing the relevant stakeholders. Also, defining the objective and the solution was done through interviews with both the IT consultants and the SME managers. And a survey was designed specifically for the SME managers to identify the artifact design objectives. The design and development phase focused actually on providing the blueprint for this gamified learning tool, or the aligner. And these were 3 main deliverables. First, the game design manual, the game design document, or the GDD, and the prototype of the user interface. We will discuss these in a bit. In the demonstration, there were feedback interviews with research stakeholders to demonstrate the game. And so as the evaluation, actually, we conducted feedback interviews with the consultants post development of the aligner. And then there was a feedback session conducted with one of the SME managers where they actually played the game. and they solved a pre-established set of questions before and post playing the game to identify the difference in their maturity as a result of playing the aligner. The communication took on actually 3 different streams. First is a scientific stream, which was done through my master's thesis defense and actually right now. And the direct communication with business stakeholders done through the interviews in all the aforementioned phases, and further development would be the next step for the aligner. Okay, moving on to the results. In the first phase, the results were a set of intended outcomes and the design artifact design objectives. And the outcomes mainly revolved around increasing the SME's overall maturity and understanding of the role of IT in their companies, and to increase their capability of aligning BPM with IT and actually encourage them in attaining the benefits of BPM and also understand how technology, practice, and strategy are interrelated together in their business context. The design objectives were mainly just having a user-friendly tool that is easy to use by the SME managers who are the user of the game, and having a step-by-step or sequential learning process, providing the know-how of integrating their IT into their business. We provided also, we made sure to provide case-based learning, and we had a scoring model that formed the feedback for the user to encourage their learning throughout the game, and mainly, of course, cover the BPIT phases that I mentioned in the model that were expectations, activities during implementation, and IT alignment evaluation. The design and development, as I already mentioned, involved the production of these 3 deliverables of the artifact. The game design manual consists of 2 sections. First, the first one is the section that discusses the background of the aligner, so what the aligner is based on theoretically. And then the other section is the storyline and the script of the actual game with all of its phases. The game design document is a document that was mainly intended for the developer in order to develop fully the aligner, and it acquires all the important concepts of the game as well as the gameplay and mechanism. The prototype of the user interface simply shows samples of the different features that the aligner has and the different question types, etc. You will take a look at one of these, at a few of these in a bit. Okay, aligner structure. This is how the game was structured. It was also based on the 3 phases that the alignment was categorized into that were mentioned in the research model. So phase 1 expectation entails the introduction and process identification and process discovery modeling. Phase 2 comprises the process analysis, the redesign, the organizational change management, and process automation. And the last phase is mainly concerned with alignment review with strategy. And they were roughly, these levels were roughly based on the BPM lifecycle. This is a sample of the aligner user interface. I don't have much time to go in depth into explaining each of these, but just take a look at how it was designed for the particular user. This is, for example, learning material. This is an example of the dashboard for the user. Moving on to the demonstration evaluation. So does it really increase the stakeholders' maturity? Evaluation results confirmed the possibility to have sufficient guidance to SMEs that with regards to how they can align their BP and IT in both an affordable and scalable manner. So what is the contribution to game-based learning of BPM? Well, firstly, of course, the creation of blueprints for the gamification of raising the alignment maturity, specifically taking into account the specific circumstances of SMEs that were affordability and scalability, and both of which had not been addressed by research before. And the research contribution could be allocated to the field of business process orientation or of process-aware organizations. Well, here, the use of incorporate gamification or the game elements in non-game context was addressed by multiple researchers. For example, Planzel in 2016, they gamified the collaborative process modeling through incorporating game elements into process modeling tools. Also, Mancibo et al. Supported game definition in BPMS platforms to encourage more sustainable behavior by the employees. Also, supporting the idea of gamification in BPM It's stated by Patrice Chual that a combination of both engagement and coordination does create the best strategy for developing gamification solutions in organizations. Also, preferences for gamification do vary across individuals, depending on factors such as personality, gender, or goal orientation, which is why design and application of the aligner should be more sensitive to different contexts in SMEs. The limitations of this research include, for example, the fact that we had to tweak some of the game aspects to suit the audience or alter some of the game aspects, and that not every phase in the BPM lifecycle was fully covered. There was a relatively low number of interviews conducted, alongside with time and other resource limitations. For future research, we recommend or we suggest that the game should be developed fully for better demonstration evaluation, and that longitudinal case studies could be conducted to test the impact on alignment capabilities and maturity, like in the long term with organizations in a real setting. Also, we suggest that to include the competition aspect in the aligner design to increase the motivation in the user's sense of in the game. And that would be actually it for the presentation. These are the links available for you to view all the deliverables that I mentioned in the artifact. And thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Mahi, for a very, very interesting, timely presentation. You did this extremely well. Marlon Dumas in the opening talked a lot about open science and what we're looking at right now, making artifacts available, something that is deeply appreciated. So thank you so much. Mahi, if you don't mind, maybe stop sharing your screen.
Yes, sure.
So we can see you a bit bigger. What I like about your presentation is gamification and BPM, I think, is something that is new and underexplored. Scaling down BPM to the context of small companies is underexplored.
Yes.
And the whole notion of process literacy or BPM literacy is underexplored. I'd like to ask you one quick question and then a question from the audience. How do you measure BPM IT alignment?
That's actually a very interesting question. I would think we could, in measuring the BPM IT alignment, we could refer to the maturity models, because this would be the only way to measure how effective the IT is, or the IT usage within a company, especially in like SME context, is aligned with their business context and their business strategy. For the game, for example, I just used the BPM lifecycle to just continuously or constantly throughout the life cycle allow the user or the manager in this case to test this alignment through every phase in the BPM life cycle. So for example, in the beginning they would test how the modeling is aligned with how they identify the problems, how the business analysis happened, what is the role of IT in this particular phase. So just increasing their maturity in understanding the role of IT in each phase of the BPM life cycle would allow them to have a better, like a checker if IT is actually aligned with BPM or not.
But you can see, I mean, just based on the comprehensive answer, how difficult it is to measure BPM IT alignment.
Of course.
We obviously don't have a single metric.
It's not, yeah.
Then I got a question here again from Mahendra from Indonesia. Thanks for this. And she's interested in how BPM maturity, which is often broken down into capabilities, and you talked about the life cycle, how these two dimensions fit together.
Again, the maturity model and the BPM life cycle?
Yeah, so you sorted your gamification or your environment based on the process life cycle, while often maturity work talks about generic capabilities and less about capability per life cycle, which is an interesting approach, which I like. But how does your work map to existing work on maturity models?
Well, actually, I have an answer, but Professor Ralph can actually help in this question. I'm not entirely sure how they both link together.
So Ralph is there as well, and I guess you can also see the question.
Okay. Hope you can see.
Yes.
Yeah, good. For the maturity models, I understand the question correctly. Indeed, most of the maturity models do not cover the BPM life cycle. However, it is maybe, I mean, we also have the next presentation and also the discussion yesterday and the other forum session revealed that the maturity models are somehow varying in scope and often not fully covering the whole story. And if we talk about IT alignment, actually it is a matter of investment for companies. It's not only the modeling and what we want to achieve, it is also the infrastructure that we need to think about and which investment will really be sustainable and profitable for us in the end. So after all, yes, we have to consider the whole life cycle. And I think this is still a research gap also when we are discussing maturity models. And I'm happy to see also what the next presenter will be saying, what Vanessa will say in that respect.
Yeah. And Owen, do you have any final question for Mahi or Ralph?
No, I think there's a dimension that's very important, which I think is the visualization aspect. Often within BPM and RPA, we lose sight of what's happening. And this gamification, I think, can be taken even further. So it's really a comment. It provides a level of visualization that provides deep insights, in my opinion.
Very good. Thank you for that. What I'd like to encourage you, and we had recent success stories, in particular in the domain of process mining, to consider a commercialization as well of your solution. I think it's fantastic when we create open scientific products. It's even better if they change the world. So by all means, don't make it just a prototype that informs your research, but see to what extent what you presented here can be deployed. And I think many of the things we discuss are of interest far beyond SMEs. So again, congratulations on being accepted, on a great presentation, and on giving the world, I think, an artifact that gets into the hands of many more BPM professionals. From all of us, well done, and thank you so much, and all the best to Cairo.
Thank you.
And then that brings us very much on time to the next and final presentation. Let me quickly introduce Vanessa, and then Owen introduces the topic. Vanessa, I understand you probably right now sit in Bamberg, where you work with your co-author, Björn Asteker at the group around Eric Suki. I understand your personal interest is around Industry 4.0 and the digitalization of industrialized business processes, and of course, the topic of your presentation, business process management maturity. So I might hand over to Owen to introduce the topic overall.
Thanks very much. Vanessa, you've also got us to just check our Latin, of course. Quo vadis, what is the future of business process maturity models, and obviously learning from the past to envision the future. Clearly, this topic is of a lot of interest, as Ralph has said. And I think the one thing that intrigues me is many companies look towards business process maturity models to even drive transformation projects. So I really look forward to this topic, and over to you.
So first of all, thank you for the warm invitation and the warm words. So let me share my screen. So now it's just your slides, hopefully. Hi everyone. Welcome to my presentation. As Owen and Michael said, I'm Vanessa, and I'm currently working at the University of Bamberg in Germany. And my colleague Björn and I have done some research about the current state of business process maturity models. So let's start with the presentation. The number of developed business process maturity models, or in short BPMs, has increased drastically in the recent years because they are considered as an essential tool for the continuous adaptation of business processes. And this has become necessary to be successful in an environment with increasing market dynamics as well as high competitive pressure. However, Pöbelbus and Röcklinger were the first to reflect critically on the steady growth in publications and question whether high quantity goes along with high quality. So lately, Tan et al. Have conducted a comprehensive and systematic literature review, taking into account studies between 1990 and 2014. And they indicate that most of the publications establish a BPMM model, show the application of a model, or compare various BPMMs. And a key finding is that the lack of empirical works on the development of BPMMs, or the key finding is that there's a lack of empirical works on the development of BPMMs. So in line with Pöbelbus and Röcklinger, Tan et al. Also expressed doubts about the quality as well as the usefulness of some reviewed models. To further investigate whether a critical perspective on the quality of some BPMMs may be justified, we have extended the previous search until 2019, and the databases as well as the search terms were of course the same. And after completing the refinement steps, we could identify a set of 69 relevant studies. So as you can see here, the publication rate has increased considerably in recent years, as well as the publication type has also changed. So whereas in the past, the majority of the articles have been published in conference proceedings, in the past 5 years, the articles have more frequently been published in journals. Tan et al. Also reported a set of 9 leading maturity models based on the recognition that the models have received in the academic world. And now based on our complementary review, we would propose to add another 3 to the list of leading maturity models. And moreover, we also analyzed the latest research streams. So we use therefore the 69 identified articles and classified them in terms of research content. So for the subcategories, as you can see here, description, empirical study on application, validation, and theoretical analysis show the strongest increase for the period from 2015 to 2019. So when we're considering Tan et al.'s hypothesis 2 and 3 remain valid, whereas there are only minor changes to hypothesis 1 and 4. So until now, most of the recommendations Tan et al. Have given in their paper have been neglected, which leads us to the conclusion that the initial doubts about the quality of some BPMMs may be or remain valid. So if the assumption about the quality is justified, this should also be reflected in publication outlets, because high-ranked journals are known to attach importance to methodological standards such as replicability and transparency of the concept, and consequently maturity models or BPMMs that have qualitative weaknesses should be difficult to be published in those outlets. So based on the Scimago journal and country rank data, we have selected 3 impact factors of the 64 journal publications. So that is Reuters and H-index, as well as the SJR indicator. And for example, the Harvard Business Review reveals by far the highest values for the Reuters as well as the H-index. And beyond that, we also calculated the mean value of each impact factor. And moreover, we also expanded the analysis to several subcategories that are related to the model development and application in general. So the subcategories release, empirical study on application, and application show the greatest difference for the two periods. And when we compare the two periods, we also find that the values from the publications of 2015 to 2019 are mostly below those values of the publications from 1990 to 2014. So now, to make valid statements about the journal's influence and relevance, we compared those values with the average impact factors of the main overarching subject categories of the journals. And for the period from 1990 to 2019, the highest values of the considered article categories only reached the lowest values of the presented subject categories. So this can be, or this leads to our finding that the papers are mostly or mainly published in less recognized journals. And this can be attributed to an insufficient theoretical foundation and methodology, as well as unsatisfactory model documentation, which thus can lead to a lack of replicability. And this is, according to Borman et al., a fundamental requirement for the publication in high quality journals. So since transparency is a prerequisite for the replicability of the results, we address the issue by identifying transparency criteria for BPMMs and extend them by business process management factors that have a proven effect on the business performance to assess the model's content. So to determine the transparency criteria, we conducted another literature search in several databases, and we got there a set of 33 relevant papers, and from these papers we extracted the respective criteria, then structured them according to their intended use, and grouped them according to 3 dimensions, so methodology, model documentation, and model content scope. And to further substantiate the assumption that many BPMMs show qualitative weaknesses, we choose the latest BPMMs and examine them independently using the our literature-based criteria. So starting off with the first dimension, and it can be stated that although the procedure models have been publicly available for around about 10 years, only 2 articles make use of such a framework. And the article by Andriani et al. Is also the only one that reports on an in-depth evaluation process, whereas the other articles do not even mention the evaluation of the BPMM. In contrast to that, we can see that the validation in practice is reported more frequently, mainly using case studies. Then moving on to the model documentation dimension, there it can be stated that the basic components of a maturity model, so the number of levels or the number of dimensions, are usually presented. However, the key criterion, the description of each activity as it might be performed at each maturity level, is not mentioned at all, even though it is crucial for the model dissemination or the model applicability and dissemination in practice. And last but not least, we have the model content scope dimension. All the criteria you can see here in this list or in this table represent capabilities that have a proven effect on the business performance, validated by at least 2 independent studies. And for example, the criteria strategic alignment and definition and documentation of processes, which by the way, all 5 models include, are considered as particularly important. So criteria, of course, that are not listed in this table, however, mentioned in the articles or integrated in the BPMs, were analyzed separately. And our literature search, unfortunately, did not identify at least 2 independent studies that verify the influence on the business performance. Thus, we cannot make a statement about the relevance of these elements. So let's wrap up the presentation. We are confident that the presented criteria can be of value for researchers or for supporting researchers in ensuring transparency during the model development process and also guiding peer reviewers in the evaluation of papers. However, there are some limitations to our study. So besides the lack of quality, there may be other reasons for not publishing BPMs in higher quality journals. And maybe it is the case that BPMs are often perceived as not contributive enough for submission in higher quality journals. So this hypothesis needs to be tested in a future empirical study. And a second limitation is that the presented criteria rely only on literature. And as already mentioned in the article, we would like to increase the explanatory power of these criteria and would like to conduct interviews focusing on these criteria in the next step. So I think in the upcoming weeks, I will elaborate on the design or the goal and design of the future empirical study. So that's it. Thank you for your attention and also the opportunity to present a short version of a paper here.
Vanessa, thank you so much. Yourself and Bjorn have applied very, very detailed academic rigor to a subject that I believe is most important. Business process maturity models are, as I said right in the beginning, not only important for companies that are even looking at transformation and wanting reference points, but with RPA and process mining, there's this constant need to reference, maturity models. So I think this is a fantastic work that you're doing. I encourage you to carry on with it and really open it up to any questions. I don't see any on the chats right now. And just open up to the panelists. Yes, Ralph, please.
Yeah, thank you for the nice presentation. Actually, I'm very happy to have both of our papers back to back in the same session. And actually, we started to discuss the relation of business process management maturity models and the BP life cycle. So actually, I would like to pass on the same question. How do you see the relation, and is this does this relate to the criteria, the scope of the maturity models where we have maybe deficiency, maybe we have to think quite newly? I mean, if we think about software engineering, CMMI, the scope was much more focused and very clear. Here with BPM, of course, the story is much more broad and much more difficult to really put into different corners. So maybe we have to rethink the whole approach of maturity models. What is your opinion when you think about aligning it to the life cycle?
Okay, maybe I have to start with answering the question that I haven't thought of before about combining these two. However, I agree to your statement that you said some parts of the life cycle may be covered by some maturity models or BPM maturity models. However, we have also not considered integrating the BPM life cycle in our literature-based criteria. Maybe the evolutionary ability could be another category for evaluating these BPMs. So we could maybe extend the model content scope dimension.
Because the IT support, sorry to interrupt, the IT support got a check mark in all of your all the main models that you looked at. So what's in it for the IT support. It doesn't really cover, I mean, if we ask for IT support, we should expect that it covers the whole life cycle.
Yeah, it's more about the, in our article, more about the redesign and application of suitable IT. So we checked if there are parts in the maturity model that integrate suitable IT systems. However, we do not check if they cover the whole life cycle. So yeah, that's maybe another limitation of our study. And we could, yeah, maybe go further or deeper in and look at if the maturity models cover all the stages. But I think like our study is like the first starting point. It's, yeah, maybe we can talk about that. It's part of my PhD, so it's like the really first part of my PhD, and we will go, look into the quality of BPMs more deeply in like, not only the next months, but also the next years. So it's a good suggestion to maybe look more deeply into the BPM life cycle.
Well, a great answer, a great question, Ralph. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions before I'd like to hand over to Michael to perhaps do a bit of a wrap up, Michael?
Yep, sure. So thank you so much, Owen, for co-chairing this event. And thank you so much, Vanessa, for a great presentation. I think as highlighted, it's important to distinguish BPM maturity from process maturity. But like Ralph indicated, I think there's a tremendous potential to specialize maturity models. We're at the end of our time. So I'd like to start by thanking, of course, the organizers to facilitate this sort of conversation. We had at its peak up to 90 participants in the Zoom call, and sometimes a crisis leads to tremendous innovation. So thanks from all of us to the entire team in Sevilla. And thanks to our speakers. So Amy, Christian, Mari, Ralph, Vanessa, and also Björn. I can only imagine how difficult it is to speak from the distance, and you all did a tremendous job. So collective congratulations from all of us. We all learned a lot. So from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as the birthplace for intelligent robots, to the fascinating idea of long-tail economics and how this model meets the process landscape. And Christian, what you do there is a very unique approach. I think gamification is popular in so many domains, and it still hasn't really hit BPM. Vanessa, I think meta studies like what you do and Björn are tremendously helpful for all of us. So I think all of you added flavor, and the value of your papers will be turning out in the years to come. So again, thanks from all of us. Thanks to Owen. And I very much hope that everyone who joined us over the last 75 minutes got value out of this. From all of us, we very much hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. And finally, of course, getting back to the video, have a chance to enjoy tapas in Sevilla one day. So with this, good night from Owen and myself from Brisbane. And wherever you are in the world, please enjoy and look after yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Adela and Pablo. Well done.